like some bad development. Okay, here's where we are now. What do we do about this now? You don't have time to just say, oh, well, God, that shouldn't have happened, or what's going to happen next. You just say, okay, what do we need to do right now? And of course, the other great gift that came out of this was, as Ryan was coming out of his coma, of course, he's like a baby again. He couldn't speak, he couldn't swallow, he couldn't walk, he was wearing a diaper, so it was like having a baby all over again. And I got a chance to really raise him again, and all of a sudden, all those mothering instincts that I didn't have before were suddenly just there.
Why do you think that they kicked in at that point?
I don't know. And I don't know if they were always there and they just never been tapped. Maybe because you're stripped down to your essentials and you don't have a chance to overthink things. You're not thinking about anything but just that child. Everything else in your life falls away. There's no job. There's no other obligation. There's not even paying bills. There's nothing. You are just so focused on how much you love this child and how essential this child is to your very being. And so I think that extreme circumstance either tapped in what was there and it was always dormant, or it was born at that moment. I don't know, but thank goodness I didn't go through my whole life and never really love my son completely and celebrate who he is, because I hadn't up until that point.
That inspired the book, the change that you felt, or the opening that you felt, and learning to have a second chance as a mother without having the distraction of all the books and all the things that you were trying to do, and just letting happen what happened.
Right. I mean, and that is, this book is really not about a brain injury. This book is about parenthood, and it's about motherhood, and it really is about learning to raise the child you have, not the child you thought you'd have. And it's looking at your child and celebrating them and saying, they're however they are, they're enough, and they're exactly who they're supposed to be. And that if you're really lucky, that they will be the teacher that teaches you who you're supposed to be.
And isn't that on the dedication of the book? You're saying to your son, who was your best teacher, or what you had learned?
He's my best teacher. I mean, absolutely. I mean, kids will bring out the absolute worst in you. There are things inside me I don't even want to acknowledge they're in there, which he brought out in me. But he's also brought out this side of me that I had never seen before and didn't know I had, and we have a completely different relationship now, because I watched that kid go through excruciating rehab. I mean, it was so hard for that. He was paralyzed on his left side for a while because it was a right side brain injury, learning how to talk again, learning how to swallow, walk, take care of himself. And I could stand back and say more that with the grace, courage, and humor that kid went through his rehab, I could just stand back in awe. And it's a wonderful feeling as a parent to be in awe of your own child and say, better human being than I am.
And that, especially at that age, that is just the age where you're trying to discover yourself and to start all over again. Now, was there a point when they didn't think that he was going to be able to walk? And was that an issue at one point during the operations and that?
Well, there was one point at Marin General where we didn't think he was going to make it through the night. His pupil blew, which means, his pupil popped, and that's a sign. It's sort of the canary in the mind, where his brain had settled down onto his brain stem, and there's the optical nerve that's near the brain stem, and as your brain goes there, it hits the optical nerve and gives you the signal that the brain is going there. And so they rushed him into surgery, but the nurse said, he may already be brain dead. We don't know. Oh. And that's when I called my parents in Florida, and I said, if you're going to come out, you should come out now. And that was the time we just thought, oh my God, he's not going to make it. And then, as he came out of his coma, they told us there was no way for them to tell how much damage had been done. And oftentimes with severe brain injuries like my son had, your personalities can change completely. And, you're sort of waiting for him to emerge, just like a baby. you don't know who that child, who is that human being in that little baby, right? So I kind of had that experience all over again, sort of waiting for Ryan to emerge. And lucky for us, he was all in there. He was funny from the start. He was courageous. And so we feel really, really, really lucky. Not to say that there aren't still challenges, because in some ways, 3 years later, Ryan's 19 now, some ways it's more challenging now than it was in the acute phase, because in the acute phase, people are taking care of him.
Right.
You know, there's a plan, there's a program, there's a strategy, there's, you know, specialists all around you. Now we're on our own. And unfortunately, the technology saves people like Ryan now that used to die. So there's a lot of people out there who have suffered severe brain injuries who now are alive, but unfortunately the aftercare hasn't caught up with the technology. So there's very few specialists that know what to do with people like Ryan who still need further and further and further rehab to self-regulate, to learn how to live independently. And so we're very much struggling with trying to piece together a plan for him so he can keep progressing.
Now, are you in touch with other families of children, and has the book been somewhat of a way to communicate with families that have sons or daughters with the same situation?
Very much so, and I do have a website, www.thewatergiver.com.
Okay.
And so I do get emails from other people, and we have kept in touch with some of the other people who were at Kentfield Rehab with Ryan after he got out of, we went from Marin General to UCSF to Kentfield Rehab. And there was one, I mean, the miracles you see, like, you understand why people go into this business, because, you know, at first you're like, oh my God, how do you do this day in and day out, take care of people who are so devastatingly injured? And they do it because they see them come out the other side. And there was this one girl, Nikki, who was amazing. She, you know, I know some people have a queasy stomach about some of this stuff, but she fell off a boat and her head was caught in the propeller. So she lost, I mean, literally lost half her brain and you know, her eye, and it was all the language center. So when we saw her at Kentfield, I mean, she literally, it was gone. And she couldn't speak. She had this kind of vacant look. She couldn't process information. And then, you know, long story short, the other side of her brain started to kick in and took over for what was missing.
Really, it's
on
amazing.
The left side. And now she's a magpie. She's had, you know, she just talks a blue streak, has had all this reconstructive surgery. She works at her parents' dental office a few days a week, as a teacher's aide a few days a week. And if you had seen her in the beginning, you would have said, oh my God, that poor girl, she's, you know, her life is over.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's the brain, and I always say that to people who, you know, sometimes I'll go visit families at Kentfield Rehab or Marin General, and I say, whatever you do, don't believe the doctors. Because the doctors don't know when it comes to brains.
Well, see, here's